Dober dan. That means good day. TalkCast PDX on the web at talkcastpdx.com. It is Tuesday, October 12th today. Always Tuesday. The name of the show is the Bogdanich Perspective. I'm your host, Paul Bogdanich, and welcome. Title of today's show is Waiting. It's episode number 31. When I do these things, especially since we've been doing the video, I come up with like a framework of what I'm going to talk about. And I do that typically over the weekend. And then I wake up Monday morning and I'm eating my breakfast, reading the paper, or doing something. And something always happens that makes me want to change the order of what I'm going to talk about. And today, opened up the internet, just to see. Market is, I can't even remember, it was near flat. It wasn't moving a lot. I don't remember whether it was up or down. But saw a little blurb. Nancy Pelosi was speaking in Europe at a NATO conference, if memory serves, doesn't matter, just somewhere in Europe. And unlike President Biden, she's allowed to interact with reporters and whatnot. And one of them asked her a question. They said, if you ruled the world, what would you do? And the first thing out of her mouth is, I think about that a lot. And then she gave some humanitarian answer. But she said, I think about that a lot. It's an interesting question. In my view, if you're what would be called a philosophical realist, and you thought about it for any length of time, you would quickly come to the conclusion that it wasn't proper, nor beneficial, nor efficacious, nor even possible. If you look to the ancients for their answer to the question, it's an age-old human question, has to do with humanity. There are basically two answers. The one answer, peoples of the book, Jews, Muslims, Christians, recognize that in their particular case, they recognize that there is God. But if, in modern secular terms, a higher power, a higher conscience, a greater good, whatever you want to call it. And then think about the requirements of said God, higher purpose, whatever. To use our modern terms, apply your energy, apply your intelligence, and do what we would call internalize it. And then do unto others as you would have others do unto you is one answer. And the other answer is emancipate yourself from that and do as you would. And those are the two ancient positions. One seemingly requires twice as much effort as the first, right? Because you would have to internalize your thoughts on all this stuff and think about it and come up with a framework and then behave accordingly. The other is, hey, just emancipate yourself, forget about it, and do as you please. And seemingly that takes less work, but it doesn't, because what you end up doing is applying your thought and your intelligence and your energy to thinking about yourself and what you would do, right? Okay, so they're equivalent propositions. You will notice in the ancient things that neither of them deny the existence of some higher purpose or power, right? Because to do so would be deny what we call conscience in human nature. So they're both very realistic ancient positions. But Miss Pelosi, what would you do if you ruled the world? The answer that she gave is the same that you get from an 8-year-old. I would assert the divine right of kings. If you have children, ask an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old. If you could do anything, what would you do? And it would be something like, I'd make it so I didn't have to go to school, or I'd, stop my brother from playing with my Barbie dolls, or, in other words, you'd assert the divine right of kings and make people bend to your will. And that was her answer. And I find that curious. And here's where I'm going to reorder my talk a little bit. Speaking of curious, Donald Trump is doing these quasi-campaign rallies, right? And he did one. He just can't stand the lack of attention. He's out there doing campaign rallies, 3 years before the election? But he's in Iowa. And he endorses Senator Charles Grassley for re-election. Grassley's up for re-election in 2022. Charles Grassley, senator from Iowa, was born on September 17th, 1933. Okay, so he just celebrated his birthday last month, and he is 88 years old. By the time he stands for re-election, he will be 89 years old. When you get reelected to a term for the Senate, it's a 6-year term. 89 plus 6 is 95, right, years old. And Mr. Trump endorses this fine statesman. I just looked at it. Putin and Merkel and Xi and all the rest of these people are mid to late 60s. All the rulers of Japan, Korea, Vietnam, just everybody is a generation younger than that. We are the only political, the average age of our Congress is older than the Soviet Politburo when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989. All right. And, that's seldom mentioned fact, but it's a fact. And here we go, endorsing Chuck Grassley. I mean, I would just reiterate my point. It's getting to the point of self-preservation. We need to get rid of these people, really do. And, in the markets and all the rest of that stuff, I had my 3 risks, and we had developments on the political risk in particular. I talked about the debt ceiling, and then how I thought that they did the debt ceiling, but they didn't. And then McConnell, Senator McConnell is the minority leader, so in charge of the Republicans, put together 10 senators, joined the Democrats, did what's called cloture, and they extended the debt limit by $408 billion. It was an unpopular thing to do amongst the Republican caucus, but he and 9 other Republican senators, felt they were in a position to do it, so they did it. But they only increased the debt ceiling by $400 billion, which is only enough to get us through to December. So it was a short-term patch. Doesn't fund any of the grand programs that the president's trying to push through. It just pays Social Security, defense spending, and all the rest of that through December. And they did that. And then immediately thereafter, same day, in the evening, the majority leader, Senator Charles Schumer, took to the floor. And he gave a speech, and he essentially punked them, punked, P-U-N-K-E-D, the Republicans who had voted with the Democrats to do that debt limit deal. Didn't thank them. Essentially said, I'm glad you see the wisdom of my position and that you finally realize the errors of your ways and, what a great guy I am. And sitting behind him was Senator Mnuchin from West Virginia. And as Schumer got about 3 sentences into his speech, or 5 sentences, something like that, Mnuchin put his head in his hands. He had his head buried in his hands. And after the speech, when he took his head out of his hands, his face was flush. It was a bright red, like when you get, when you're extremely embarrassed or have really high blood pressure, so, he did that, Senator Schumer. And McConnell, who wrote a letter to the president last week, wrote another one. It's an important letter, very short. I made it even shorter. I took out a few superfluous words and things like that. I probably took out a total of 20 words, but with my edits, just to get rid of the flowery stuff. The letter that he sent to President Biden reads, I could get my glasses on here. Okay. Dear President Biden, last night, Republicans filled the leadership vacuum that has troubled the Senate since January. I write to inform you that I will not provide such assistance again. The Senate Democratic leader had 3 months to manage a straightforward process that would take less than 2 weeks. Whether through weakness or an intentional effort to bully his own members, Senator Schumer marched the nation to the doorstep of disaster. Embarrassingly, it got to the point where senators on both sides were pleading for leadership to protect our citizens. I stepped up. Last night, in a bizarre spectacle, Senator Schumer exploded in a rant that was so partisan, angry, and corrosive that even Democratic senators were visibly embarrassed by him and for him. This tantrum encapsulated and escalated a pattern of angry incompetence from Senator Schumer. It was reminiscent of last year when he joined a protest on the steps of the Supreme Court and shouted threats at individual justices by name. This childish behavior only further alienated the Republicans who helped facilitate this short-term patch. It has poisoned the well. I am writing to make it clear that I will not be party to any future effort to mitigate the consequences of Democratic mismanagement. You now have the time they claimed they lacked to address the debt ceiling through standalone reconciliation and all the tools to do it. They cannot invent another crisis and ask for my help. End of letter. It's important letter. If you know how to read political statements and political letters, the letter that he sent last week spoke in the voice of him as the minority leader. My fellow Republicans and I, my caucus, this and so on. This letter, we're all hung up on pronouns these days, right? This letter is an I and my letter. I write to inform you that I will not provide such assistance again. I stepped up. I am writing to make it clear that I will not be party to any future effort to mitigate the consequences of democratic mismanagement. They cannot invent another crisis and ask for my help. Speaking very personally, it's like being in a bar or with one of your friends, if you're a male. I don't know how females handle this stuff, but from my experience. And you're just having a conversation with one of your friends and you're disagreeing on something and, you're trying to make each other see each other's points and it's not happening. And it gets to a place where one guy says, well, whatever, dude, do whatever it is you're going to do. But, when you're doing that, I'm going to be over here doing this. Right. And then you just leave it at that. But it's, that kind of a letter. You can't count on me for this one. Right. And that causes political instability, which is a threat to the market. I mentioned, I had a list from last week just touching on the COVID. Last week we were at 2,000 a day. Now we're up to, and this is as of September 4th again, 2,250 a day. The CDC is starting to reduce the data sets under Dr. Fauci. They changed the definition of what counts as a case and all the rest of that stuff that I already went through. Now they're starting to constrict the data. All the scientists are to the point where they're saying the only thing that you can trust out of the only numbers that you can trust out of the Centers for Disease Control are total deaths, and that you have to interpolate everything from there because they're playing with the other numbers, like we did with the Iraq War, trying to make the facts fit the political decision. And then, more importantly, I mentioned things that would cause a decrease to economic activity, and that was inflation, the supply chain disruption. And a couple of developments there. The employment report for the month of September came out. Justin, if you could please put up chart number 1. And it came out on October 8th, which was last Friday. And the headline numbers were 194,000 jobs created. Economists' expectations were 400,000. What everybody was saying before the release is we know it's going to be a beat. A beat means more than expectations. The only question is by how much. Turned out to be less than half of the expectations, 194,000 jobs created. Also in the headline, the unemployment rate fell from 5.2 to 4.8%. Average hourly wages went from $34.80, or average weekly hours worked went to 34.8 from 34.7, and average hourly wages increased to $30.85, which was up from $30.66. And then, as you can see by the chart here, I went into the detailed categories. If you add up all the detailed categories without the subtractions, which are the red numbers over there in the graph, there were 435,000 jobs created. But once you get rid of the about 435,000. And once you get done with the listed subtractions on this list, plus the other ones that were too small to list, you get to that 194,000 jobs created number. This list that you're looking at is anything over 10,000 jobs. The ones that are important, or the ones I want to talk about, let's put it that way, everything's important. Local government and education, excluding education, was the largest new employer at 42,500. And then everybody else was below 30,000, only three, as you can see, in between 30 and 20,000. Performing arts and spectator sports is cool. I think it's a good deal. The baseball and the football. I don't know if I watch baseball. Boston Red Sox beat the Tampa Bay Rays, man, for the division championship yesterday. Pretty exciting stuff. All the sports writers have to pen apologies because everybody was saying how the Rays were going to cream them. But some interesting developments there. When you look at the games, if you watch the games on television, not a mask in sight. The Los Angeles Giants, or the San Francisco Giants, are playing the Los Angeles Dodgers. So Los Angeles versus San Francisco in the other divisional playoff. Not a mask, very, very few masks in sight there. And it's interesting. The day before the game, San Francisco had an indoor and outdoor mask requirement. The day before the game, the city commissioners got together and they decided that the science was enough for them to drop their mask mandate the night before the game. They did that so that for a political fig leaf, just to make it clear that nobody was listening to them. Yeah. That they, even with if they'd have maintained that indoor mask mandate, MLB has a policy of you don't have to have a positive test. You don't have to be vaccinated. All you have to do is not be visibly sick and you can attend a baseball game, and people were. And you can watch any of these games and there's almost nobody in a mask and the stadiums are full, So it's very interesting. But that's kind of like when the Soviet Union fell. The then dictator of East Germany, Honecker, and the then dictator of Romania, Nicolae Ceausescu, when the protests were in the streets, they both took the position that what they had to do was crush the protests using armed force. In the case of Honecker, he appealed to Gorbachev for permission and was denied. In the case of Ceausescu, he went ahead and ordered the army to crush the protests, and the army disobeyed. He had fled within the week, right? And, when people stop following, when you're a dictator, telling people what to do, and people stop following your orders, that's the end of it. So I think the San Francisco City Council decided not to suffer the embarrassment and change the law the day before the game because they knew everybody was going to tell them, stuff it where the sun doesn't shine. So very interesting. Motion picture and sound production was up 13,000. Interesting. Netflix. I knew a guy when I went to the rocket launch. I met a guy working for Netflix. He was off for a year, a little over, because they suspended production, and they paid him for the entire year. Very interesting. The subtractions in the former list were nursing and care home facilities, educational services, community care for the elderly, and local government education. And they were huge, 210,000 jobs altogether. And one has to ask, oh, you can take that down again. One has to ask, how many of those are people that were told that they had to become vaccinated that said no or are not doing it? And we don't know. And there's no easy way to figure it out. The employment report, which we just reported the numbers for, are only gross. The number of employees working in the various industries gross. 3 months delayed. The one for July just came out, called JOLTS, Job Opening and Labor Turnover Survey. Looks more carefully. It takes 3 months because they correlate payrolls to unemployment reports and so on. And so the last numbers we have for July, we won't have this month's numbers till January. But even that won't tell us. Their three categories are quits, separations, and hires. So if you're a person working at a care home facility or an elderly care facility, and your boss comes to you and says, hey, we're a medical facility, you have to get vaccinated. And you say, well, yeah, that's true. You're a medical facility, but all I do is work in the kitchen and, take care of the dishes. And I don't want to, you're not paying me enough. And, the guy says, okay, well, you're fired for cause because that's our policy. What is he? He didn't quit. All right. He's not eligible for unemployment, the way that they're trying to coerce everybody into getting these vaccines, right? So he's not eligible for unemployment. So I'm not even sure as he counts as a separation. And the only place that I can see where he would show up is a reduction in the labor force. And please notice, from the employment report, the unemployment rate fell from 5.2 to 4.8%. Huge drop. Okay. On the order of 10%, a 10% drop. And the only way, again, they could tell us, they could direct the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, to give us an estimate of how many people were removed from the labor force because of this vaccination mandate, but they won't do it because it would counter their narrative. And I think that's what Facebook and Twitter and all the rest, I think that's what they're good for, is they convince people that there's no critical mass. If you're one of these people that's rebellious for this, a lot of people just don't like being told what to do. Forget that it's a vaccination. They just don't like you telling them what to do. I'm here to do my work. I want to collect my paycheck. What is all this? Stop telling, I'll do my job. I'll show up on time. Just, cut it out with the rest of the stuff. And, to quantify them, the only place that I can see where they would show up is they would be people who, for one reason or another, remove themselves from the labor force. The only place that would show up is in the unemployment rate. And like I said, we had a big drop in the unemployment rate. If that hypothesis is correct, that number will become even larger going forward. And now we should work. Oh, yes, one other thing. Speaking of political fossils and people who assert the divine right of kings and telling people what to do, Joe Biden went to one of his press conferences where he's not allowed to interact with the audience, take questions, or give answers. They trot him out from time to time just to verify that he's still alive and can read a teleprompter, basically, is what they do. But he read his teleprompter, and his teleprompter told him to say, quote, "We're making sure healthcare workers are vaccinated because if you seek care at a healthcare facility, you should have a certainty that the people providing that care are protected from COVID and cannot spread it to you." Within 2 days, his head of the I guess it would be the FDA. This Walensky woman was on one of the Sunday news shows. Oh, so she was speaking to CNN, her favorite network. And she said, our vaccines are working exceptionally well. They continue to work well for Delta with regard to severe illness and death. They prevent it, meaning severe illness and death. But what they can't do anymore is prevent transmission. Transmission, in that technical sense, means either catching the virus or spreading the virus, right? So that's, and Biden is saying you need to get vaccinated so that there's a certainty that you cannot spread it. And then, of course, he can't take questions. So you can't see what his mental state is, what he knows or what he doesn't know. And it's all very curious. And those are the political risks. I think they're huge. I think, in my view, it's coming to the point of self-preservation. We have to get rid of these people or they're going to take us down. I would reiterate, start looking for this on TalkCast PDX because Google's going to, or YouTube, owned by Google, is going to eventually delete me if I keep saying this. Then we have the economic risks, earnings reports. They start this week. It's the financial sector this week. From our top 30, the only companies that report are JP Morgan reports tomorrow. Bank America and United Health both report on Thursday. Other companies that are not in our top 30 list include people like Alcoa, Walgreens, Bank America, U.S. Bank, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Progressive Insurance, the other insurance companies, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, et cetera, et cetera. It's a big financial week, but that doesn't tell you much about inflation or supply chain shortages other than their opinions, with the exception of people like Walgreens and Alcoa. But so we'll start to get some hints. Next week is when they get into it. And when these CEOs discuss forward-looking earnings, the number of them that say, my earnings for the quarter ended December 31st, my revenue is going to be down 5 to 7% because I don't have anything to sell because my ship can't get into the port. And there's going to be, a number of those. CVS, I don't know if you've been in a CVS. They're a dead-ass short, in my opinion. I looked at the one of the puts. I can't remember. I think it was a January 85 or something. Was a good deal. But they're going to have to say that their revenue is going to be down 10. But they have nothing on the shelves. I went in to buy a bandage. Okay, a bandage. Let me say that again. A bandage. Wound care. Okay. And they didn't even have enough stock on the shelf to properly treat a laceration. No tape, no gauze, no butterfly, nothing. So if it's, and that's in my area, if it's like that all over the nation, these guys be lucky to keep their stores open. But that's going to happen. We're going to be talking about that, the inflation and the supply chain shortages. It's going to be discussed through the economic reports. If you could put up graph 2, Justin. And just to show where we are as we get into this graph is one of the ones that I've been showing for the last 3 weeks. It only runs from March 31st through October 11th, so very recently. It's good through the close of business yesterday. Notice the support level, 43.60, approximating the 100-day moving average. So it might be one, it might be the other, but that's the support level. When the market goes below it, they try and kick it back up, but it's bouncing off that support level. It's bounced off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Okay, in the last 2 weeks. The question is, are these earnings reports so concerning in terms of inflation? And you can pull that graph down, Justin. Are these earnings reports so concerning in terms of inflation, and supply chain shortages that the Fed can't defend that 43.60 level without overt buying, blatant, they're supporting it. The market should be dropping, but it's not because they're buying the stock. All right, blatant support. And then that gets back to the political situation again, because Powell's term expires in February. Certain Democratic senators want to scuttle the nomination, and they don't, and nobody's proposed who the replacement is. And so there's no certainty that they're even going to do that. And I'm worried about it. As I keep saying, 68% cash, the rest hedged. If I was somebody who wasn't capable of actively managing like that, I think I'd call my investment advisor and say, hey, I'm going on vacation. Just give him some excuse. I had a dream last night. I'm going on vacation. Don't try and explain it to him or argue with him. Give him an order. Tell him, put me 50% in the dividend funds and put the other 50% in cash, and I'll call you in November and see what we should do. After these earnings reports are over. I'd strongly recommend that at this point. Because even if the market goes down, you'll still be earning 5 to 6% a year on that 50% through the dividends. And you'll have the other 50% in cash to pick things up at a bargain. But if these earnings reports and things are as I expect, the supply chain shortage and the political mismanagement, the Japanese, by the way, I should say, they put a new cabinet post in the Ministry of the Interior to deal with the shipping and the supply chain shortages in Japan last week. They did something about it, right? Chinese have a controlled system. They're doing the only people that's not doing anything is us. And like I said, the supply chains and all the rest of it are going to, in my view, as these earnings reports start to detail that, the downward pressure on the market is going to be severe. The Fed is either going to have to overtly support 43.60 or it's not. I'm not sure they have the political consensus or power to do that. I would, do what I said. Call the broker. Don't ask him. Tell him 50% in dividends, 50% in cash. I'll call you in November, and we'll see where we are. Is what I would do. If we look at our portfolios and I'm not a registered investment advisor or a licensed broker. That's just what I would do. I actually did worse than that. I'm 68% cash, fully hedged on the rest. But if I had to prognosticate, that would be my prognostication for what it's worth. Anyway, our 4 portfolios for the week ended last week, the 8th. Boy, I'm going on. The market went up 34.3 points. Portfolios should have returned 800. Top 30 equal cap weight returned 842, right on the number. Top 30 equal weight returned 757, right on the number. Top 3 every sector, because it included energy and materials. Price of oil is $85 a barrel, which means the price of gas is going up, which means the price of energy is going up, which means inflation is going up, right? They returned $430 because they included those sectors. My portfolios only returned a giant $48, but hedges added $29. So, and I only have 13 companies, so my returns were positive $77. Just briefly looking at the top companies before we close it out here. You had 8 companies that gained more than 3%. Berkshire Hathaway gained 3.1%. Air Products gained 3.1%. Netflix gained 3.2%. Kinder Morgan, oil services company, gained 3.3%. Chevron, oil company, proper, gained 3.6%. Nike, just basically recovering some of the losses from last week, gained 3.7%. United Health gained 4.1%. And ConocoPhillips, again, gained 6.7%. The only energy company off that list is Exxon, that gained 2.1%. So below the 3% threshold. You had 5 companies that gained more than 2 but less than 3, 11 companies that gained more than 1% but less than 2, 11 companies that fell less than 1%, 11 companies that fell more than 1%, but less than 2%. No, excuse me. 6 companies that fell, but fell less than 1%. 7 companies that fell more than 1, but less than 2%. And only 2 companies that fell more than 2%. And those were Comcast, that fell 4.4%, apparently on poor expectations for the number of people that are maintaining their service. And Facebook, because of all the legal testifying in front of Congress, power outages, and all the rest of that, fell 3.8%. Verizon, which is in the same boat as Comcast, fell 1.2%, call it. Crown Castle Real Estate Investment Trust fell 1.9%. And again, for the third week in a row, please notice that the largest companies, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Tesla, Berkshire Hathaway, Visa, etc., were not in the list, right, of either the top performers or the low. They're stuck in the middle. Google was up 2.4%. I'm looking here. Tesla was up 1.3%. Apple was up 0.2%. Amazon was up 0.2%. I don't immediately see Microsoft. And that's what's happening. You have to protect yourself. The politicians are going to drag us down. They're off the rails. They're too old. Let's elect Senator Grassley. Yay! 89 years old. Re-elect Senator Grassley. Anyway, that's it for today. This has been the Bogdanich Perspective. It's Tuesday, October 12th. Thanks for joining, and W. That means goodbye.